Welcome back, everyone. It is Wins Above Fantasy, episode 139. Today is Thursday, May 16th. For those of you joining on the podcast, for those of you joining the live stream, happy hump day. We are through it. Steve, I am through 3 days and got a 0.00 ERA in my home league, but we're not here to talk about how good I'm doing because it's good. We're here to talk about some new StatCast metrics that the industry is ablaze talking about. And it is, it's like Christmas in May, Steve, but it's been met with some, skepticism, healthy skepticism, and plenty of people weighing in on it. So you might ask yourself, is WAF going to weigh in on it when everyone else is talking about it? And the answer is yes, because we can't help ourselves. And we are excited that we have a new thing to analyze and break down, even if it's at the very beginning of this new frontier. Cannot wait, Steve. It's going to be a great show. We've got a couple great shows following this one next week and the week after with fantastic guests that you've lined up. So even though I'm feeling a little stuffy with the baby daycare week 4 of trying to get healthy, overall the vibes are high. How's it going, man?
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, I was afraid that it's like, oh no, another bat tracking Batcast, if you will, podcast. But I think we have a different, simpler twist to it that I think will be a way of looking at it from a high level and like defining what it is, because it can be overwhelming. There is seemingly a stat now for everything. We do have sort of metric overload or saturation in the metric department, if you will. But I think it's important to take a step back and think about what we're looking at and like go over what it is, because a lot of people see all these cool numbers and the red highlights on the Savant page and, red good, blue bad, and dive into it right away without really fully understanding it. Not saying that people don't understand it. There's a lot more people, hell of a lot smarter than me, that know how this works. But I think it's a good moment to take a step back and actually go through what we're looking at and how MLB and the people at Baseball Savant, Mike Petriel and Tom Tango and all of them that worked years on this to put this together and create this public facing database that's going to help us and define what it is. Because I think a lot of that controversy that you're hinting at sort of comes from just diving into it and trying to be the first one to find out this stat or put out this tweet or find this interesting leaderboard. So I think before we do that, it's just important to, hey, look at what we're doing and define what we're looking at.
Yeah. I mean, we've always been a podcast that I think has been transparently students of the industry, where, we're not going to pretend we're smarter than some of the top experts that are out there. That said, we are also going to aggregate when we can some of the perspectives that we've heard. And that's a little bit of a teaser. I don't know, Steve, are we spoiling anything on our guests next week and week after, or are we leaving that a surprise?
Let's leave next week's a surprise for now. But in 2 weeks, we're going to bring this topic back again with Pitcherlist Kyle Bland, the head of analytics and research for Pitcherlist, and he's been a guest on the show before when PLV first came out. Kyle, to sort of go down the rundown here, like this was supposed to, or it was, it was announced by MLB that the baseball, the bat tracking leaderboard was going to be released this past Monday. It actually went live on Sunday night, like right before Sunday Night Baseball. And a few hours after that, like, dude, that night, like Kyle had one of those Streamlit apps that he uses for PLV with all the with all the bat tracking data. Like that night, he like whipped it together. He is just absolutely incredible. So yeah, we're gonna keep this one high level and like more of like define what we're looking at and go over definitions and talk about high level stuff. But then we can really get into the weeds and some of the fun stuff with Kyle, with someone that has already built tools to look at rolling swing speed and break down where in the zone, swings are longer or shorter in pretty apps and things like that, and
Yep.
graphics. So Kyle's amazing at that, and super pumped to have him on in 2 weeks. We're gonna have him on tonight, but his Colorado Avalanche are in the middle of a game 5, and I felt bad even inviting him on, knowing
No. Yeah.
that's on. So
You can't do it.
yeah,
Yeah.
give him a break there. But yeah, it's there's a lot of cool stuff, and we have a lot of cool stuff coming up on the show. And then yeah, we'll keep this one under wraps for next week. But I guess not to bury the lead with Kyle, but someone I'm really, really excited of, really big fan of their work, to come on next week and talk pitching again. So
Yeah. You
uh,
will not want to
yeah,
miss that one
it's an
or the
exciting
one
few
after.
weeks for stat nerds and for WAF, right? With this bat tracking metrics, and then some cool guests coming up.
Well, and you guys can follow it not only every Thursday on the podcast, but also on Twitter, where we post our live streams on Wednesday nights at Wins Above Pod. It's usually about 9 o'clock Eastern time. You can follow us on Twitter ourselves at Van_verified. Steve is at Stav8818. But Steve, let's broach the subject here, because we've got baseballsavant.mlb.com is the site. I hear around the industry people kind of allude to it and StatCast sliders, but for anybody who has not checked it out, you do want to go out and kind of play in the sandbox, because on the leaderboards there is new bat tracking data, and this is probably stuff that will be the source for additional data and leaderboards for years to come. We might not fully round out how good this I guess how good this data can become for analysis and for predictive, projecting batters, all that. It might be a couple of years before we get the most from this data. But for now, it is very new. It's also very fun to look at. It's easy to sort it. It's easy to see the savant red that we're used to seeing, and the icy blue for guys who aren't doing things well, quote unquote. But there is, of course, deeper analysis with all of this, and that's what we're going to talk about throughout the show. Steve, my first reaction, I have to say, I have to pick on the industry a little bit. I think it's funny, just as like a baseball guy, a fantasy guy, when something like this comes out, I don't even have to pull up Twitter before I know that a lot of people out there are upset about the data that's out there. And I could have predicted all of the things that were sarcastic, that were saying it's going to be flawed, that we're going to be saying be careful. And I get that it's for a good reason, but at the same time, I kind of sit back and chuckle, and I'm like, this is a good thing. Like, it's new data.
There,
It's exciting. It's
there's
going to be cool.
there's a ton of cynicism in it
So
in
much.
the industry, and like yes, I understand that, and it's like how many metrics are, but like this is just raw data. Like it's just this stuff was there.
Don't get mad at the data.
It's just now measured. Like all the teams had this for years. MLB had this for years. Savant had this for years. Like to as beta testing before they rolled out this leaderboard and all the public facing data. Like all yes, of course. Like there's the cynicism. And I'm, not to like, I know Bubba was tweeted, Bubba in the Bloom of Casey Bubba of the First Pitch podcast, as Bubba in the Bloom, was talking about how, yeah, well, of course, the guys that hit the ball hard and have the highest max exit velocity swing the hardest. Like, no duh. Yes, that is true. But now we have an actual number to how hard these guys are swinging. There's the actual data inputs, and that's really cool in my mind, at least. Like, it's awesome that yes, even before we knew what barrels were, right? Like, oh, you got to barrel up the baseball, like you just missed it, he fouled, like you break even before Savant, like you would look at slow motion replays and see, oh, it was just a little bit off the barrel, that's why it was a warning track fly out, not a home run. Like people knew what barrels were. Now we just have a way to measure it. People know what fast bats do. Now we just have a way to measure it, and I think it's really cool that it's out there. Yeah, there are things that we need to be, careful with. We don't have year-over-year data, which I think is super important, at least in like determining who's healthy and has a faster bat than last year, who's lost bat speed, who's gained bat speed. shout out to Kyle, because his app that I hinted at earlier has rolling bat speed data for this year at least, so you could at least see in season how people's bat speeds have changed, which is really cool and could be indicative of injuries or better performance to come if people's bats are getting faster or their swings are getting longer, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And not necessarily a good way. We'll talk about that later when we get to like swing length and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just great to have the actual data inputs, and that's all it is.
Yeah.
It's just the data.
One thing I wanted to shout there, because like I said, we're aggregators. Of course, like rates and barrels, you're going to want to hear Eno and DVR talk about this. Like the CBS guys mentioned it briefly, but Eno and DVR did a deep dive.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you get a free 14 minutes, Lance Brozdowski, who's one of our favorite follows on Twitter, he put out a YouTube video. I think that it kind of influencer style. He got the data a little bit early and got to play around with it. And he put out a video that kind of breaks it down. And he had a really insightful thing that I wanted to kind of recycle here, Steve. He said, think about all the stuff we have for pitchers, right? And it's like spin rate and extension and arm slot and IVB and all this stuff. And it's like for hitters, we had like surface level metrics.
We
like
kind of only had results. We kind of only had results, right? Like barrel is a result.
It is.
Exit velocity is a result.
Yes.
We had all the results. We didn't have any of the inputs. These are the
inputs. And we just have to figure out how they pair up with one another, which the bright minds of the industry are already doing, which, by the way, some of them are the ones who are cynical. And I also am talking out of both sides of my mouth because I'm saying thank you for being cynical and making it make more sense. But I just think we could be better about like, let the people have their fun. And, it's like in my line of work in marketing, our average customer for the brands I work with have like a ninth grade reading level. And it's like that. Remember that in the broad universe of fantasy baseball, some people might just love to go out and look at this. Like not everyone is data scientists that break it down. So just let's welcome the change. Let's welcome the newness. That's my main take on it.
Yeah, I agree. And yes, just to finish my point with what you said about, having all the data for hitters and or per pitchers, not for hitters, but hitting's like an art form, right? There's a lot more that just goes into it than swing speed and swing length. There's a ton more, but at least like we have this now. Like yes, this is not saying that either one is the end all be all. Like you could be bad at both these things and still be a good hitter. We're good at one, bad at the other. As far as what some of the inputs that we'll get into, but it's great that we have this sort of stuff now, and there's going to be more stuff to come. This year, I think Mike Petriello was hinting about a few other metrics that are going to come to Savant soon. So it's my favorite website. Like I'm on Savant all day. I could like 367 days a week, 365, 24/7. The tab is always open. I love this stuff. I'm not claiming to be the smartest one or the best person at Savant, but it's great to have it. And, I know we need to be quote unquote careful with it, but I love that we have it and think that there could be a lot of useful things in the short term, and then even more so in the long term.
Well, I think with that said, to kind of wade into the waters here about what stats are out there, to kind of go down the list of bat tracking. Like you said, it's not available year over year yet. It's going to be fascinating to look at that. I'm sure when we talk about actual players who are having slumps this year or breakouts, that's going to be a broken record that we say, oh, it'd be nice if we had what his bat tracking data was last year. But what we're looking at, what we have visibility to now, is what we're calling a fast swing, like an average bat speed, which averages out the average of his top 90% of swings. They constitute as a fast swing as 75 miles per hour or higher. There's a squared up rate, which compares how much exit velocity was basically, did they get the most out of that swing based on their own swing speed and also the pitch velocity. Then there's a blast, which combines kind of a squared up batted ball with a fast swing. So it's kind of the best of the best. And then swing length, like you mentioned, Steve, and that kind of reminds me of like pitching extension in a way, although it's not necessarily where like the longest swing length is always a good thing, like usually we say for extension. And then absolutely hilarious that they've just created the stat out of the pitching ninja sword that's been made popular on Twitter from the pitching ninja. So like that's Rob Friedman at pitching ninja. You guys can see all of basically the broken batter swings where they're having a regrettable swing midway through the swing, and now it's a StatCast stat, which is just banter. So that is the list here. And Steve, I think before we jump in, do you want to say anything about kind of the swath here of the data? Because I know we're going to break them down like one by one when we go here.
No, I think that high level sums it up. There's a few other things that you can kind of combine that I think we'll get into a little bit later in the show, and then get really into the weeds in 2 weeks with Kyle. But I think we can dig into what each one of these things are, and then some interesting names from each of the leaderboards, which I think is cool, and the first thing that you should do when playing around with this new tool.
Love it. Well, yeah, let's get in there. So fast swing is fast swing rate. By definition, fast swing is one that reaches a swing speed of 75 miles per hour. A player's fast swing rate is simply showing the percentage of all his swings that did reach 75 miles per hour. In the first month of 2024, 23% of all swings qualified as a fast swing. So for this one, just pulling up fast swing rate, the very top is Giancarlo Stanton, which is 98.1% is his fast swing rate. And then there's a huge drop off, Steve, to the other guys on the leaderboard, which is O'Neill Cruz, Kyle Schwarber, Ronald Acuna, Christopher Morel, Aaron Judge, Joe Adele, Juan Soto, Wilson Contreras, Julio Rodriguez. So right away, kind of this swing speed, fast swing rate definitely has the feel of guys who, in a way, are boppers and in some instances kind of hackers that have high strikeout rates. The question is, how do we break down like a list and a stat like this when you've got one of the better hitters in baseball and Aaron Judge, and certainly Juan Soto at number 8, next to a guy, for instance, like Matt Chapman at 11 or Christopher Morel. So I guess right away you can almost use the eye test on this leaderboard to say this is a data point, but it's probably not the be all end all of what we're looking for in a good hitter. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. And sort of just to take a step back here, like we're fast swing is in relation to average bat speed. That's what this is, a bat speed leaderboard. So it just measures how fast your bat is moving. And I believe it's the point of contact.
And the measurement itself.
And it's
I think
measured,
the measurement, right. Yeah.
Yes. On the bat, it's measured at the barrel. So like 6 inches from the top of the bat.
Mm-hmm.
So because the bat moves at different speeds, and they measure it at the barrel of the bat. And obviously that's important too, because that's like where you want to hit the ball. So then like how often you're swinging hard. It's crazy that Giancarlo Stanton swings hard 98% of the time. And another thing that you mentioned there was competitive swings. They basically eliminated competitive, the bottom 10% of competitive swings that are bunts, check swings. Tom Tango had a nice tweet about why they needed to do this and breaking it down visually. And there's just a bunch of outliers all the way down towards like 20 miles an hour that you would just never want to consider when making an average. And those are like, the squaring to bunts and half swings, things like that, that don't get included in that top 90%. And it just makes it much better when calculating an average. And then there's obviously some interesting stuff. What's nice about this leaderboard, there's little question marks next to each one of these leaderboard headers. And it brings you to the definition, and that's where we got these nice little graphics for the stream from MLB. why we care about fast swings. Fast swings, swings over 75 miles an hour. They have a 307 batting average, 603 slug, 389 WOBA, a 52% hard hit rate, and a 0.6 run value per 100. Compare that to not fast swings. It's a 246 batting average, 369 slug, 266 WOBA, 35% hard hit rate, negative 3.2 run value per 100. Again, that's not saying that fast swings are the end all be all. There's a lot of different ways to be successful, and you also need to make contact. And with another tool that we'll show here later, fast swings is correlated with whiff rate, right? So the more you swing harder or faster, the more you're going to miss the ball. So that has to be considered too. Those numbers are event based, like when you make contact with a fast swing versus when you make contact and put a ball in play with a slow swing. So that's also a really big piece of it. And yes, that's why people are cynical, and that needs to be considered. It's not like, okay, that's all I care about, fast swing. No, there's a lot more to it. But obviously when you have a fast swing and make contact, you do better.
Well, and it's like some of the best results, some of the best hits, of course, most of the best hits are from fast swings, but it doesn't mean that you should have a fast swing on every single pitch. And I think that the flip, the inverse of this leaderboard is almost as telling as the top of the leaderboard itself. And that if you flip the average bat speed, the very last place in the league is Luis Arias, who is a batting title champion. Stephen Kwan is second from the bottom. Just hitters. And to me, that I know that there was kind of a correlation on dropping bat speed with breaking balls, to kind of, whether it's weight on it or you're just not trying to catch up. But it's like, I don't want to hypothesize without knowing the data, but it's like you don't want to swing at the same speed of a fastball as you do with the changeup. And it's that kind of simple analysis that like you should be adjusting your swing probably. And on top of that, just looking at the names, some of the very best hitters in the game have the slowest bat speed. I think it might be good right now, Steve, if you're on board, listening to Eno and DVR, one thing that was very interesting was when they were talking about the relationship between bat speed and swing length, because there's a very direct relationship with some of the highest bat speed guys in the league also having the longest swing length. So it's actually moving the bat the furthest distance, which is not always a good thing at all. So Javi Baez has the number one largest swing length in the league. Giancarlo Stanton is number two.
Luis Arias has the shortest, like that. There's a direct correlation between swing length and bat speed. Giancarlo Stanton has the second longest swing length. There's also a product of height that needs to be factored in here. We do need some sort of height adjusted swing length, things like that. But in general, if you're going to swing harder, you're going to have a longer swing. So, that's important to consider. And it just goes to show that, like, there's a lot of value in Luis Arias and Stephen Kwan. And those guys have the two slowest swings in baseball. They have not swung the bat faster than 75 miles an hour. They have a 0% fast swing rate. So you can be successful. And even a guy like Kwan, before he got hurt, was tapping into some more power. So like, I'm not saying that not a 30 home run hitter or anything like that, but he had 3 in 145 plate appearances. Like that's absolutely well on his way to his career high.
So I think searching on these leaderboards for some of the outliers can help poke holes and raise questions. For instance, just from saying that, if no one's looked at the leaderboard yet and they're hearing us talk, and it's like Luis Arias is there, Stephen Kwan is there, Nicky Lopez is there, and you're probably nodding your head and you're like, yep, these are all the same prototype. 15th shortest swing length in the league is Freddie Freeman. That is not the same type of hitter as Luis Arias and Stephen Kwan. So that's where a lot of kind of the early speculation is, that really it's about kind of getting the most speed from a swing length. And that's where, not to spoil it, but more so to tease it with Kyle Bland, we're going to be talking about acceleration and the idea of kind of taking whatever swing length you do have and maximizing the speed within that, because that's where you look for the outliers on who has a short swing length and a high bat speed, or who has a high bat speed on that leaderboard and doesn't have like a top of the top swing length. Like, surprise, surprise, the lowest one in the top 15, Juan Soto. So that type of thing. But then there's interesting ones. Like, I know that I heard this name earlier too, but Jesus Sanchez, his swing length and bat speed kind of look very similar to Juan Soto. And it's like, just even saying those two names next to each other, of course, it's not exact and it's kind of flawed, but it makes me think twice about dropping Jesus Sanchez in our, WAF listener league. So go ahead, Steve, though.
I think sort of a rule of thumb, or, ideally you want a short, fast swing, and just sorting on this leaderboard by swing length from shortest to longest, like you could see like which guys have a high, fast swing rate with the short swing length. Guys that stick out are Lamont Wade Jr., Corey Seager, Lars Nootbaar, Cabrian Hayes, Wyatt Langford, Paul DeYoung, actually, Brian Reynolds, and Colton Cowser. So,
but even a little bit deeper on that list too, Steve, is like Bobby Witt Jr. And like that, the Corbin Carroll. Those are really good names.
Yeah. This data makes me still believe in Corbin Carroll, at least long term. Maybe he is battling through something and there's something going on, but a guy like Brent Rooker, who's on fire right now, has the 60th shortest swing in the league, but swings hard 30 or swings fast 35% of the time. So there's some telling things in this. Again, it's not, now Brent Rooker is this totally changed player that isn't going to have these ups and downs. Like, yes, he is. But there's some light onto the process that we didn't necessarily have before.
Yeah. So Rooker would have the 59th highest fast swing rate there. And like you said, in terms of the swing length, like top 60 in both, like that's above that. Right. That's a good, you want to be on
again, it's telling because, bat speed is correlated directly with swing length. Like, the faster you swing the bat, the longer your swings.
Yeah. And also distance too. I mean, if you think about like the tip of a windmill, right, that's moving way faster than near the hub of it. And it's kind of that logic as well, that Midwest logic there. But we have plenty of other stats that we are going to be kind of diving in similarly, talking about the leaderboard, but we're going to take our first ad break and we'll be right back after this. All right. So Steve, next up, we got squared up rate. This kind of reminds me of our original, for any OG listeners, our original TLDR segments when we had to try to play data science and describe these metrics. Now, squared up rate is basically, let me get my data in front of me, but it's basically the max attainable exit velocity based on the speed of the swing. So the batter's in control of the speed of the swing, and then also the velocity of the pitch, which that portion, the pitch portion, is weighted a little bit smaller than the speed of the bat. But based on the bat speed, based on the pitch that comes in, there's basically a max exit velocity. And squaring a ball up is defined by attaining 80% of that potential exit velocity. So, of course, when we think about squared up in a less nerdy sense, we think about basically barreling the bat. But when we actually get into the metrics, barrel itself comes with like launch angle as well and the exit velocity. This is more saying, are you getting the most of that swing? So it could even be kind of a weak swing and a changeup, but you could still technically square it up if you made the most of that pitch. And that, Steve, is kind of the summary. Do you want to add, revise, or change what I just said there? Because I'm doing my best here to wade through this.
No, I think you did. I think you did a great job, and we got that nice graphic up. I recommend everyone when looking at these leaderboards before doing so, clicking that little question mark, reading these articles where we got these graphics from, and going on from there. They go into it in really great detail, but you did do a great job there. So, yeah, like there is there's a max attainable exit velocity based on the pitch speed and your swing. And if you get that, if you get 80% of that, it's considered a squared up ball. And not surprisingly, guys like Luis Arias, Nolan Shanuel, Nicky Lopez are at the top of this list. But then there's also guys like Juan Soto, Mookie Betts, Brendan Donovan, not surprising, Stephen Kwan, Nico Horner, but also Marcus Simeon, Michael Garcia, William Contreras, who's we'll get into it, but seemingly really good at all of these bat tracking metrics.
Steve,
so,
this list is based on contact, right? So that
yes,
this kind of has plate
sorry, I was
discipline.
looking at per swing. So based on swing, I was looking at overall. So it does factor in like swing and miss. Like you can also sort by contact, like squared up by contact. It's a similar list. Arias is third. But if you take into the fact, I like looking at swing because it brings in plate discipline and swing and miss into it too. That's just my default. But what I was going through on that leaderboard is per swing. That's also a nice thing about this leaderboard. You can do it by contact or by swing. I default to swing just to, factor out guys that swing and miss a lot. If there's 10 pitches and you swing and miss at 8 of them, you make contact on 2, and one of those contacts is squared up, your squared up percentage on contact's gonna be 50%. On swing, it's gonna be 10%, right? If you swung at all 10 of those pitches.
Yeah, I think first of all, it's kind of confusing because the term sweet spot is used a lot with this squared up, but they actually have a sweet spot percentage stat that has been there in the past that again I think brings in more launch angle. So
that's based on launch angle, yes.
Yes. So you could, to clarify, still square up a grounder on a weak swing. It's just basically saying you made the most of that pitch, I think. We'll get
again,
to,
I think an easy way to distinguish between the exit velocity and barrels leaderboard and the bat tracking leaderboard is exit velocity and barrels results. Sweet spot is a result. Where did you launch the ball at what spray angle?
Yeah.
Squared up is absent any of those any of that context. It's just, did you achieve this exit velocity from this swing and this pitch velocity?
Yeah. Which I think is, I don't know. I guess you got to be careful how you.
Especially I think this one too. Hinted at it on rates of barrels. This one feels very line drive ratey.
Or like flare burner type of thing. Yeah.
If I had to guess, and I'm not a sabermetrician or statistician, if I had to guess, squared up rate is going to be one of the least sticky stats from year to year when we do get year-over-year data for this.
That's right, because it's just like, are they
again? That's literally pure speculation from my end.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be dwarfed quickly because in a way it's the little brother of the next stat, which is the blast percent. And the blast percent pretty much looks at that squared up, but it also folds in that it has a fast swing to go with it. So now we're not just saying like, technically it could have been a slow swing and a dribbler, but at least you got 80% of the max potential power. Now this is saying, okay, and it's a fast swing. So to me, this is like basically how a barrel rate takes a hard hit, but elevates it quite literally, because it's like, oh, not only was it a hard hit, but it was also at this launch angle, which is great. To me, that's what a blast is doing with squared up, where it's like, okay, squared up it's like true contact, but not only true contact, it's true contact on a fast swing. And that's where basically squaring up the ball gets you results that next to not squaring up a ball, or not next to not having a blast, the data looks very, very different. So to spell that out, Blasts had a 545 batting average, an 1116 slug, and a 99.9% hard hit rate. Not Blasts had a 177 batting average. So almost 400 batting average points down. And then the slug was 221 compared to an 1116, a 17% hard hit rate versus a 99.9% hard hit rate. So a fast swing and true contact equals a blast, which equals night and day better than a not blast. But this one, to me, Steve, I don't know why I would ever look at squared up necessarily without going to blast next, right?
Because then you'll miss on the Luis Arises of the world and the Stephen Kwans of the world.
That's true. Yeah. Slap hitter.
But
yeah.
It is pretty cool. There's an actual strict definition and formula. It's percent squared up. So like how much percentage you squared up, like 80, 90, whatever, times 100 plus bat speed is greater than or equal to 164. And the shorthand way of that is the average between squared up rate and your bat speed needs to be 82. So like if you had a 92%, if that ball was 92% squared up and you swung 80 miles an hour, it's a blast. If your average was less of the two was less than 82, it's not a blast. And they have cool examples on this article. The glossary definition. Mike Petriello also did an amazing article breaking all this down. Like there's it's not just an arbitrary number, that 82. I think there was a reason why there is a reason why. I'll bring up the article once you pick up here, but there's a reason why like 82 is a number. It's like 90% of those result in or more than 50% of those resulted in home runs, something like that, as far as a blast. So they do really, really well. And like if I had to pick a stat that I'm most interested in the short term from this leaderboard, it is the blast per swing, because I want guys who square up the ball a good amount of time and swing hard when they're doing so, because those results are going to be really good more often than not.
Yeah, and I glossed over that. It was a good point though, Steve, that like squared up, when you do sort that leaderboard, that tends to be like, kind of your pure leadoff hitters, don't have a ton of pop, but they're kind of your glue guys from an average standpoint. And then when you get to the blast by swing, like you said, probably the best one on here. And these are like fantasy all-stars when it's right. Now, some of the names on the list are not fantasy all-stars yet, which makes it interesting to kind of theorize or look into them deeper. Of course, it's not the be all end all, but when you see, names that look a lot like the top 50 hitters in the league, and then you see a name like Jackson Merrill, now you've got my attention. Now I'm going to look closer and say, okay, well, yeah, his swing length is pretty small, which we just said is good. And his average bat speed is kind of above average, which is nice. And here's this blast per swing, which is good as well. So I bet when we talk with Kyle Bland, a guy like Jackson Merrill might be one that comes up on that like acceleration type of metric that takes swing speed by swing length and says, this is kind of the good window that you want to be in. But yeah, I don't know.
Only 7% of swings qualify as blasts, so it's really hard to do.
That'd be an interesting one too, because we have it's just like what percent of, so it's of their swings. So just to play this out, Steve. So like what we're saying is Juan Soto, who's the leader of blast by swings, has a 24% rate. So we're saying if Juan Soto swings the bat 4 times, 1 out of those 4 times will be a blast.
Blast per swing. That is a good question.
Because on contact, it's saying 1 out of 3, basically.
Yes, 30%. On swing, yeah. I mean, that makes sense. Like, and if 7's the average, right? Like his percentile is the 100th percentile for that, right? But yeah, I mean, considering the fact that it doesn't whiff that much. That makes sense. That would be something that I want to check though. As
right.
sort
Just
of
as we're
doing this,
teasing it.
but yeah,
I didn't mean to
yeah.
throw you on the
No,
spot
no,
there, but
no.
yeah, if
But
that's the case, I mean, that just shows. I mean, looking at so many of these things, I think that's probably how we got to close the show, is just opening it up to all the guys. But you mentioned earlier some names like jumping out at you. I think you said Corbin Carroll. Looking through, and William Contreras as well, but looking through this, Juan Soto, to me, it almost validates the data. It's like when Kyle Bland was talking about PLV with us, and he's like, gosh, you love to see like Spencer Strider and Garrett Cole at the top of your model. Like, to me, this underlines when we've said like Juan Soto is one of the best hitters in baseball. You can watch him and say that. You can say something similar about like Yordan Alvarez. To see those guys up here, and Soto especially, is like, oh man, like, it's no accident. This guy should be just a lock for a first rounder for years to come.
yeah, and that's so 7% of all swings in the league.
Yeah, fair.
Are blasts. 24% of Juan Soto's are blasts.
Which makes sense. If you think about lower thirds of lineups and, pinch hitters and everything, like, of course, Soto should be 3 times better than them at crushing a ball.
And again, it's not necessarily a barrel, right? Because it doesn't take into account.
True. And he hits really hard grounders as well. I mean, historically.
Plenty of blasts are probably grounders. So, there's a lot more context that needs to be added to these stats, right? Which is, where
the cynicism.
Where the cynicism comes. It's interesting looking at the StatCast sliders. Sweet spot percentage is now launched. LA sweet spot percentage. They added that to sort of clarify that, right? And Juan Soto's sweet spot percentage is 50%. So a lot of those blasts are into the ground, not necessarily barrels, right? Even though he is really good at barreling the ball at 17.7%. And then another quick note, I wanted to just give a shout out to a friend of the program, former WAF guest, Alex Chamberlain, because he had blasts on his leaderboard. And
it was an amazing metric.
Yeah, it's amazing stat. It's like really, really good barrels. It was barrels that were above 98 miles an hour, right? Or above 100, and then a tighter launch angle. So like a way of refining barrels. And he called them blasts. And now he kind of just got usurped by that. I think Tom Tango did show a tweet about like, the origin of where this blast name came from.
Yeah, the streets won't forget the original blast.
Yeah, the OG blast. We'll have to just call it that going forward, because I'm still going to use that stat. I
also love that. I love that Chamberlain, one of his comments, which by the way, he's one that he will dive into the data.
It's already on the leaderboard.
It's on the leaderboard.
It's on the pitch leaderboard already.
And I loved his tweet that he was like, what was it? It was like the bat tracking for hitters is tired. The bat tracking data for pitchers is wired.
Tired bat tracking data for hitters, wired bat tracking data for pitchers. Yeah. Alex is like the best.
Which we haven't talked about that, Steve. Like the pitching side of this, which is another thing that Lance talked about. Like, this really can open up a really interesting frontier. I mean, we talked briefly about like the swords as being a stat, and as much as that's a joke, it's also like sometimes that is an indicator of stuff. If you can make a hitter look just completely silly and folding over like a pretzel, like, that's one example, but there will actually be a million of smarter examples of how we'll be able to use this data and view this data for pitchers to say, okay, who's gotten the longest swings on them, and does it have to do with contact point, which is a big thing, because some pull hitters are going to appear to have a longer swing length because they're hitting the ball out in front of them, and it's like, what change-ups are getting people to swing out in front, like all these different aspects that we'll be able to look at for pitchers over time will be really exciting with this too, which we haven't talked about.
Yeah, and some of that other data that's coming later in the summer is going to be even more interesting for pitchers, because there's going to be like missed distance, like how much you miss the ball by from your bat, which is going to be telling. You could do some really cool things by seeing, who swings slower versus their average, versus certain pitchers, who has longer swings versus certain pitchers, things like that, like you were hinting at. So that's really cool. I did see, kind of some kind of cynical tweets too, like how this is just going to give the pitchers eventually another leg up, about how to attack hitters and what to do versus them, which is, not something that I want, someone that likes offense a lot, not something that I want to hear necessarily, but probably is true to a certain extent, right? Like it's just more information for probably hitters to use against, or pitchers to use against hitters, knowing when guys swing harder, knowing what guys swing harder at. But again, like,
Right.
teams had this info for much longer. But in Eno Sarris's article on this on The Athletic, it had more of a lens about how, like, when this data becomes public, like once pitch tracking became a thing in like 2006, and velocity readings became public, not just like things that were on radars in the stadium and on broadcast. Following that, when that became public information, pitchers chased more velocity went up. Once Savant came out in 2015, spin rates went up when spin rates became public. Exit velocities and barrels went up. Max EVs went up. So guys chase this when it becomes public information and more prevalent information. And with that,
That's interesting.
came that injuries from guys trying to throw harder, guys trying to spin the ball more. Now with bat speed, like there's concern, like, are guys going to try and swing harder? And now that this is public, not that, again, not that these players didn't have this information, but there's a correlation of when this information goes public and guys trying to chase that. And then, hinted at some concern about oblique injuries, because that's sort of like the UCL for pitchers, for hitters, with them trying to turn so hard and get so much torque out of their body and chase bat speed. So there is that side to it that I think is interesting. Be sure to check out Eno's article in The Athletic on this. There was some great info on hitting coaches and perspectives on that. And also obviously how we can use this data and what's ahead of for it. But yeah, I think it's just super interesting, and really glad that we have it. But just also there is a concerning side to it too, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, another thing that's cool and probably for like real life baseball more than fantasy, but the team stats as well, and that's been some cool views. I'm trying to figure out how to pull that up, Steve, like in real time.
Yeah, that's actually a good sort of transition. There's some really cool tools on this leaderboard that aren't on the standard exit velocity and barrels. I actually tweeted Tom Tango and he wrote back. There's this toggle league average stat that's great. Like it adds a header to the league average so you can see it. Like I always wanted that on Baseball Savant's exit velocities. Like I normally have to go to pitcher list players page to see the league average and run back to Savant to compare it. And I tweeted to Tom and I was like, is this ever going to come on the exit velocity? He's like, we have so many things on our to-do list that if something's not broken, like it's not going to get bumped up. So like that leaderboard's working. Like, we can't add anything to it. It's basically on just an older template than the bat tracking one. The exit velocity and barrel one is on an older template. So totally understand that from Tom and understand how much they're probably working on at all times. But awesome that he tweeted me back. But yeah, there at the top of the page, there's this awesome interactive chart, and I have a screenshot up of it on the list. You could choose your X and Y axis, and then Van sort of will do a real life or live lesson. If you filter on batter and team, and then hit update on the bottom right, it updates from players. So the very first filter in the top left is batters dash, and you click batters dash team and you hit update on the bottom left corner, and then instead of players you get teams, so you can see which teams have the average bat speed, their average squared up rate,
And that's where you can
So
get into, just seeing like philosophical stuff like swing
yeah,
length. Again, like the lowest swing length in the league is the White Sox. And they also have the
the
second
slowest
slowest
swings or
bat
second
speed.
slowest. Yeah,
So at least that's in line. But like we were saying earlier, of wanting high bat speed with a smaller swing length, the best kind of combination of the two, I believe, is like the Orioles, which makes a lot of sense
yeah.
because
Yeah, and Eno was talking about that on the episode too, how they scout for hit tool, which is kind of like a short swing length and squared up, and then do like weighted bat programs to sort of merge the two, scouting and analytics and bat speed, and they do a really good job of that.
so it's a
Yeah,
great
they're out there.
sandbox.
You
Yeah.
do x-axis swing length and y-axis average bat speed. They're out there on their own with short, quick bats. Like they're like the only one all the way up in the upper left quadrant. If you do that sort of um,
Yeah.
chart in comparison.
Yeah, the only ones that are even like remotely close are like Yankees, Giants,
Yeah,
A's, which is wild, but
yeah,
they're not nearly the average bat speed. So a
yeah. They're
lot of
yeah.
really cool things. And we got to end, Steve, by talking about some players, individuals that kind of caught our eye, assess if they're buy lows or decent spec ads. But we got to take our second ad break, and then we'll be right back after this. All right. So, Steve, opening the floor here, is there anything else process or stat wise you wanted to talk about before we actually just start playing with the sliders and seeing what names are exciting?
Yeah, one other tool I wanted to bring up, and I'll add it to the live stream here, is the speed distribution comparison. That could be found by looking at the any one of the leaderboards, and then there's a visual link all the way to the right, and you click. It's literally titled link, and it brings you a link, and it brings up a batch speed distribution comparison, and you can compare any hitter to any hitter in the league as far as their bat speed. You could even do it for switch hitters, like I have up here on the live stream, from both sides of the plate. So you could see something really cool about Ellie De La Cruz, about where his average bat speed is as a right-handed hitter and where it is as a left-handed hitter. Basically, as a left-handed hitter, he's like O'Neal Cruz, Giancarlo Stanton, swinging hard all the time, like probably a 76 mile an hour average bat speed. As a righty, it's more towards like 70, where that peak is and that average is. But what's interesting about it is there's still a lot of hard swings as righties. It's just flattened out and distributed a little bit more evenly. Like it's a much there's a steeper point um for a slower bat speed, and it's not really slow. It's at 70 miles an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And then, a drop down and then a little less of a peak. Whereas from the left-handed side, you just see he's getting a lot of bat speed all the time, which is really, really interesting. You could do it for any sort of players. You can keep the league average in context too. It's a really cool tool that I just wanted to bring up. That is absolutely awesome. It's really cool to look at as far as their bat speed distribution. And then also shout out Kyle Bland. His app does a lot of stuff like this. He has the rolling bat speed for the year that looks something similar to this. So super pumped to have him on in 2 weeks and
Yeah, we got
into this further.
We definitely got to tease that, because he's got his own app with a lot of different ways to.
Mm-hmm.
And I know he acknowledged that it's kind of a first crack at using the data.
Yeah.
So it's he's a continuous improver for sure. But cannot wait for that in a couple weeks. So Steve, jumping into some of these names here, I have just updated my chart, or we should pull up the chart for anyone joined on the stream, where the traditional leaderboard is just average bat speed on the x-axis and the squared up per swing on the y-axis.
That's the standard. Yeah, when you first load up the
Well, what do we want to
leaderboard.
do it to? Do we want to do maybe
I
average?
think there's some what we have up on the stream is what you just said, right? Squared up on the x-axis, squared up per swing, and then bat speed on the y-axis. You can kind of see Juan Soto living there on his own. You can see Luis Arias all the way in the bottom right that has a really high squared up percentage, but doesn't swing the bat fast, and then a bunch of guys that swing the bat fast but have a harder time to squaring up the ball. You kind of want to be in that Juan Soto quadrant, the top right, as close as you can get it. Like living in that area is like Ketel Marte, Jeremy Pena, Salvador Perez, Yandy Diaz, Francisco Lindor, Brian Reynolds, Shohei Ohtani, William Contreras are those two other guys that stand out there. Alec Baum is there, like CJ Abrams. So there's some really interesting hitters like Fernando Tatis in that quadrant, Bobby Witt, Yordan Alvarez. So like rule of thumb, that's kind of where you want to be. But there's still, plenty of ways to get to where you want to see. But
let me throw
I don't know. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say to throw out something, because totally agree that the Juan Soto quadrant is the exciting one. And that's, high bat speed, high squared up, but the low bat speed and the high squared up has some interesting. So that far right leader, well, besides Luis Arias, is Mookie Betts. And granted, he has a higher bat speed than a lot of these guys. Yeah. But what do you think about right next to Mookie Betts is a Mr. Brendan Donovan, who has similar bat speed, similar squared up per swing rate, and I think even similar squared up per contact rate. Let me double check that. Let's just live call this here. Yes, so he's right beneath Mookie on both the squared up per swing and squared up per contact, and similar bats. Now let's go to the swing length. Both of them have a 6.9 swing length. So am I right in concluding that Brendan Donovan is Mookie Betts right now for the Cardinals?
No, okay. I don't think you are, and I think that's a perfect example of
where the data
of a trap that we could fall into, right? Just because there's a lot more that has to go into it. Let's sort of. I want to try and get them on, at least on the swing speed, and then just compare some of their numbers that could be. They should be close to each other on the leaderboard, right? Yeah, they're one Torrey Polanco apart, right? What's interesting to me is that they have similar fast swing rates. So, like, despite the fact that their average isn't low, it's decently, like, they still swing hard 10% of the time, 11% of the time for Betts. I think a big difference is just, I think the quality of contact after that is important to look at.
Yeah.
Donovan's not like a ground ball guy or anything like that, which is kind of surprising. I thought that maybe that would be the difference, but I think that
straight. Yeah, I'm trying to look at like the spray directions too.
Yeah, I think that's really, really a big piece of it. Like Mookie Betts' sweet spot percentage for launch angle is 44%. Where Brendan Donovan's is 32%. So Brendan Donovan's in the 38th percentile, and Mookie Betts is in the 93rd or 95th percentile for sweet spot. Yeah. So Mookie Betts is doing all these things and hitting the ball in the direction that he wants to hit the ball in. And Brendan Donovan's doing all these things and not necessarily hitting the ball where he needs to, whether that's lazier fly balls, more ground balls.
His weak percentage is double what Mookie's is. So some of those, the bad hits, the flare burner percentage, which is a good thing. It's part of that like ideal plate approach. Brendan Donovan is at a 23.9%. Mookie is at a 35.7%. So that's the type of stuff that I kind of probably oversimplify as like good piece of hitting, right? And just like, throwing a bat at it, but having a little bloop line drive and things like that. But yeah, it's just interesting.
It just goes to show how there's similar inputs, but the results still are determined on a lot of other factors, and all of Betts's other factors are really good, whereas Donovan's might not necessarily be the best.
Yeah, we'll have to flag that as an example for Kyle Bland to spend like 1 minute on and just
Like
validate
explain the difference between Mookie Betts and Brendan Donovan.
because their stuff's so close. Yeah, but
Yeah.
what names jumped out at you, Steve?
A few names on just the raw bat speed leaderboard that jumped out to me that were kind of surprising. Matt Chapman, Christopher Morel, Joe Adell, Julio
Joe
Rodriguez.
Adell for sure with this breakout. I mean,
Yeah,
that's going to be one of the quickest takeaways just because he was
and
1
his
week
swing, and he
away.
has an average length swing too.
Yeah.
So like there's at least, I guess you could see like another cool thing about all this. It's like it's kind of quantifying a lot of stuff that we relied on like scouts for. Oh, he has amazing bat speed. Oh, he has a really short swing
Yeah,
with good
short
bat
to it,
speed.
long through
Like
it. Yeah.
yes, it quantifies that. And you kind of can see why scouts probably fell in love with Adele, and he was this number one prospect for so long. And it might be starting to work out a little bit for him. There's a lot of cool stuff going on with him, even beyond just this bat speed metric that he's really good at. There's a lot of chase rate improvements, strikeout rate improvements, quality contact improvements that are interesting for Joe Adell, and I think that this might be a post-hype breakout, or at least something to watch. And these sort of inputs reassure that a bit. I think it was just cool that Adele sort of had a mini little hot streak here the week leading up to this metric release.
Let me throw out. I'll just do this in real time again on high bat speed and low or short swing length.
Short swing, high bat, or
let's say bat speed,
short swing.
bat speed above 72 miles per hour and a swing length beneath 7.6, and we'll
Which
just
7.6 I believe is the average.
So that would be Matt Chapman qualifies as that. Then we've got Juan Soto.
Sorry, 7.3 feet is the average.
Okay. So then we've got Juan Soto. We've got Jesus Sanchez. We've got Gunnar Henderson. Love to see it on the home league. Bobby Witt Jr. We've got Pete Alonso. Ellie De La Cruz.
That's crazy because Ellie's like 6'6", and yet still has an average.
Totally, you would think
length?
it'd be like O'Neal
Cruz.
That's
crazy. Yeah, that's absolutely crazy.
Even O'Neal Cruz at 7.7. I guess that's pretty big.
Yeah.
But yeah, just looking at like those shorter, like Corbin Carroll was another one who's kind of short swing length, high. Lawrence Butler is a name that we talked about last year that it's interesting to see. He doesn't have a longer swing, because I'm quickly just associating longer swings with a higher strikeout rate, right, wrong, or indifferent. But yeah, Wilson Contreras is one you talked about earlier, Steve, just mentioned. But if we're going to blast by swing, which is our favorite metric so far, just on like shorthand categorizing from this page, it goes Juan Soto number 1, William Contreras number 2 overall. And Contreras, again, if this is more looking at what we've seen this season, like William Contreras is having an unreal catch, or not even for a catcher, for any player. He's got a 987 OPS. He's hitting 359. So it looks like it's truly like he's on fire, and it's deserved. Now, whether it's going to sustain is another thing. But then you got Shohei Ohtani, which feels on brand. But then like Yandy Diaz at number 6. I guess ground balls is the issue, right? Then that's always been the case.
So not to toot my own horn here, and I know we're coming up on it, but something that I think that is cool to do with this is sort of pair this new metric, like the blast per swing that we like to look at, with some of the result stats that we know about, know when they stabilize, know it's league average, have year-over-year comparisons. And something that I ran just quickly, one of my lovely Excel VLOOKUPs and comparisons to filter, And I ran this on the 14th, so yesterday, as of Tuesday. I looked for players with a 10% blast per swing. So, like we knew that seven essentially is the league average. So guys that are really good at blast per swing, that also had a 10% barrel rate, right? Like eight, I think is an average league barrel as a barrel percentage. So, and that's a result stat that we know about, and that's
Mhm.
people that put the ball in the air at the X velocity that we want to. So, a really good barrel percentage above 10%, and then also a whiff percentage lower than league average at 25.2%. So, guys that have this blast per swing, the good inputs essentially, have a good barrel rate, good results, and don't whiff a lot. So make contact, or at least whiff less than average. And there's a list of 15 players, and it's sorted by blast per swing. That's Juan Soto, Salvador Perez, Kyle Tucker, Yordan Alvarez, Bobby Witt Jr., Ketel Marte, Taylor Ward, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., Vinny Pasquantino, Ryan Jeffers, Brandon Nimmo, Will Smith, Josh Naylor, Corey Seager, and Reese Hoskins. That's it.
Wow. There's some interesting names in there, though. Like
Yeah.
Jeffers, what's he doing in there? It's good to hear Vinny P is in there, but it makes sense with
Not surprising
yeah,
considering,
yep.
all of his process is always really good. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a good list for sure. You threw that one on Twitter, right, Steve?
Yes, I did.
That was who you were saying buy the dip on Julio.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
so. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. No, it's interesting. I mean, are you planning on using it for any of it for buy lows or ads right now, or like what's your closing takeaway? Because it is early, and in 2 weeks we're already going to have better data and guidance on it than what we have right now. How are you kind of pulling it into your week to week fantasy manager tactics?
Maybe as a double check.
Yeah,
I'm still about my process of I'm going to look for the result driven StatCast numbers that we believe. I'm going to look for plate discipline first. I'm going to look for things that I know when they stabilize. We don't necessarily, I'm sure swing speed stabilizes quickly, right? Because the denominator swings and there's a lot of swings early, right? Like that's what's going to be cool about it going forward. It's going to be like a max EV, like a better max EV, right? Like
yeah,
if a
yeah,
guy hits it's max EV of 117 on opening day, like, okay, this guy's healthy, he has raw power. Can he tap into it? If a guy's swinging hard throughout the first week of the season or harder than he is last year, sure, we could use it then. For now, I'm going to do things like I did with that tweet and that comparison, and look for things in tandem, to be reassuring. If Vinny P goes through another little dry spell like he did in the beginning of the year, to say, hey, have faith in this. This guy has a good process, and then use it in tandem with things that I am more
hmm
sure of and comfortable of, and things that we have year over year changes and things like that.
yeah. Yeah, and I think we have to just continue to familiarize that it's not just like bat speed. We'll start to realize what the relationships are, but like I think it's interesting that like even though Giancarlo Stanton is far and away has the best average bat speed, you go over to squared up, which is that like, quality getting the most out of the contact, and not even squared up by swing, which has plate discipline. If you just do squared up by contact, Stanton is 60th in the league. I'm sorry, 65th.
Yeah.
So that just goes to show that like it truly is not all about how fast you're swinging the bat
Yeah.
if you're not getting the most of that bat speed that you're putting into your
I
swing.
mean, Stanton's a perfect example, right? Like he's, you know,
He's a cautionary tale in
yeah,
some
yeah.
ways.
I mean,
Yeah.
he's, you know, usable in fantasy, but he's not. I mean, there's a lot of you don't want a team full of Giancarlo Stans, essentially.
Yeah, that's correct. So all right. Well, that is I guess the WAF primer, Steve. We had to do it and we got through it. It's exciting to have it all at our fingertips. Again, you guys should go out, mess around with the data. Next week we'll have a fantastic guest on. We'll probably touch on this, but talk some pitchers and You will not want to miss that one. And then the week after, we'll have Kyle Bland on from Pitcher List, and we will get much smarter about this topic and even more actionable with Kyle and his own leaderboard that he's kind of drawn metrics from this as the source data. So very much looking forward to it. You guys should be hanging in with us. As always, you can follow us on Twitter at WinsAbovePod. I'm at Van_verified, and Steve is at Stav8818. But that wraps us up for episode 139. Thank you guys, as always, for talking baseball with us.
Thanks for listening. Happy bat tracking.